Welcome to the second program in our series on versatile ombre quilting. Taking center stage are ombre fabrics that gradate in color and hue from selvage to selvage. The subtle or sometimes very dramatic gradations will enhance your designs whether you are a traditional quilter or an art quilter. During this program, art quilts team up with ombre fabrics, and Natalie Sewell, my longtime friend and quilting buddy, introduced me to the art of landscape quilting, is now here today to show how to work with ombre fabrics to give powerful but results with a minimum of work. Natalie, years ago when we worked with, you first told me about ombres. The light to the dark was just what my ombre quilt needed.
Ombres can lend a wonderful sense of depth to landscape quilts. In this scene, called Lake Keweenaw Bay, I've depicted a shoreline along Lake Superior and used the back of a blue ombre for its background. The shading from light blue to dark blue reads as sky and water, all in one fabric. Representing another season is Nancy's quilt, Chance of Flurries. This scene was created with only two fabrics, an ombre and a leaf print fabric. We're going to use this design to show you the effectiveness of ombres for landscape quilts.
Versatile ombre quilting, that's what's coming up next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effect threads, because creativity is never black and white. Koala Sewing Cabinets, hand-built in the USA by American craftsmen, customized for you. Clover, makers of sewing, knitting, quilting, and embroidery products for over 25 years. Experience the Clover difference. Amazing designs and Class A needles.
During the first program of this series, we took a very traditional approach to quilting, but now Natalie and I are going to go to our favorite art quilting technique of landscaping. And Natalie, as we mentioned, ombres are the star of the show, other than you, of course, but the reason that they are the star is because of their gradation light to dark.
Yes, they're wonderful to use for all kinds of wonderful effects that you really can't get in any other medium except watercolor. And with fabric, having this gradation is a wonderful aspect.
Some of the gradated fabrics have a little mottled background. Some are just solids. Others have prints. And we have our favorites.
We sure do. And one of our favorites is the one that I've used in this quilt right here. This has some texture, but not that much texture. And as you can see, I've used the back of the fabric because that reduces the intensity a bit. And I've taken off a little bit of the darkest part of the water and gone up to the sky. This one fabric makes both water and sky. And as you know, when you look at a scene,
yes,
you can hardly see the difference between the water and the sky since the sky is reflected in the water. I've changed the quilting stitch, and we'll show you later how we do that. But otherwise, it's all really like a whole cloth quilt.
And as we take down your beautiful design, you'll see the backdrop with grays and whites, and not quite white, but black. And because underneath is the quilt that I created called Chance of Flurries with two fabrics, the gradated fabric and then a leaf fabric that I have very little left of this leaf fabric, but this was the only second fabric that was needed to create this design.
It's a very effective scene, and without the ombre, so much would not have been possible.
You know, this is not my favorite time of year for those of us who live where we have very distinct seasons, yet with this fabric, it somehow looks better in the fabric than it does out the window when it's that season. But the trees were created from the darkest section.
Yes, I noticed that you've cut at least that, almost a foot.
12 inches, right.
From the darkest part of the fabric.
And it was cut along the lengthwise grain, so I had the same intensity of the dark and gray, very mottled area to be used as the trees. So we're going to quickly give you the very basics of landscape quilting and show you just with 2 fabrics in our raw edge applique technique how ombres can be the ideal option for working with the fabrics. Now Natalie, I'm just going to move this down a little bit so we have some work area to work with. And if you've been with us over the years to do landscape quilting, you know that we use a glue stick and a little scrap of Pellon fleece or any type of fleece that you may want to use. And we have cut that 12 inches of fabric into some trees. And the trees aren't telephone poles. They're not cut with a rotary cutter. You can just kind of cut them freehand, so that they look like trees with a few little ins and outs, and you don't want them to be just perfect.
Be generous with your glue because it makes a huge difference. And then you can take your time deciding when you're going to actually sew them down.
The glue is just a temporary positioning tool. And often, Natalie, I know when we teach and people ask me about landscape quilting, they think, glue on fabric? It's okay. It will dry clear, and it's a great, and you can reposition it.
And it's much lighter than fusing, so it will still allow you to have loft in your quilt.
We're not going to recreate my quilt exactly, but just put up a few of the trees and then show you some of the concepts. And you need more glue than I positioned there, Natalie, so I'm just give that a little extra.
And then shading makes a huge difference, and we use all kinds of tools for shading. One of them is an oil pastel available at art supply stores or office supply stores, and they do a terrific job of making trees look much more realistic.
And you can see that the flatness of this tree compared to what Natalie's using in oil pastel really makes a great difference. I'm also going to use, let's see, I'm going to get a little sliver here to make a branch.
How about I take take this sliver.
And this is going to kind of manifest in front of your eyes the change that you can create with just this one fabric because it gradates from one to the other. Now I have to say Natalie is probably the best person in the world to make branches, but I'm going to do my best. Just trying to give them elbows. And this branch is going to go over like this. We don't want it to be too curved. It has to be more angular. So we'll crink those elbows a little bit.
Well, together Nancy and I have discovered lots of different tricks for making trees and branches look more realistic. And Nancy is the expert on bark.
Well, we'll see about that. But anyone could do this type of tree because the fabric has been gradated in that form. As Natalie's putting up another branch, I'm going to tell you about some other tools that you would use for landscape quilting with ombres. You'll need some laundry markers, permanent fabric markers. We've used black and silver is what are the two main colors that you'll need. And to give shading, as you can see on the quilt, if we could take a look at one of these branches, we have the shading coming at the top of the branch, a little scrap there, that is giving highlights to it. It's not just solid black. And adding some little linear marks, and you can just draw in that shading. And Natalie's shading that upper portion of the branch with the gray fabric marker, and you can see just the light and dark contrast that it gives to the fabric. And I'm just going to add a little extra shading through the middle. This is a crash course in using these ombres, but what a wonderful way to get some depth with just one fabric. Now, if you want to add some more realism to this scene, you could also add in some real fine branches.
And the trick here, I think, is just to hold your pen really loosely and wiggle it around, and you get elbows and glitches that come from branches.
It's very realistic.
Well, branches are sort of messy, and we tend to be neat.
And then to give some highlights, you can just go over the top with a little gray.
Exactly.
You can do
just
that.
tracing along the line of the branch with gray gives the branch depth. Real simple trick.
And you can just add more trees, add more branches, but you get the basic principle of working with this technique. And I have even found for a real close-up, you can add little nubbins like they have, you see where leaves at one time were on the branch, and just extend that branch, give those little extensions. So with one fabric, we don't have the design complete, but you get the concept. It's very simple. Now one more fabric, hold two fabrics, and Natalie has cut out some fussy cutting of a beautiful leaf fabric.
Just a few leaves that were left on the tree that'll probably stay there till spring.
Here, we'll just tuck that underneath. It's kind of bothering us. There we are. It looks better. And you know those tenacious leaves that just want to hold out all during winter? For those of you who live in that climate, you know you'll see those all during winter. And that's what we have here. Now people often ask, what's the next step? I have it designed. Well, here's a close-up of stitching all the elements just in place. And Natalie, we just use clear thread and kind of hold it all down.
Right. Our goal is not to do a perfect job, but just to hold each piece in place until we get to the point where we've layered our quilt and we're able to do our machine quilting.
The next step that we'd like to share with you is the stippling technique. Now this will vary on an ombre. On this particular quilt, I followed the model background, had kind of a wispy background, and my stitching emulated that design on the fabric. You'll find that Natalie uses a different stitch to get the sky and water differentiated. So we'll show you how to layer the fabric and then do the final stippling for this ombre fabric landscape quilting. The next step of working with ombres and landscape quilting is to layer the fabric, the top fabric, the batting, and the backing, pin them together, and then do free motion stitching. And Natalie, we have lots of our students who are just a little apprehensive about this step.
Right. They want to know, oh, how do you know what to do when? Well, I let the fabric really tell me what to do. In ombres, when we've used one piece of fabric for both the sky and the water, for example, we want to differentiate between sky and water. And so in that case, I've stippled the sky very tightly with little tiny circles. And then when I get to the water, I actually draw a line with a pencil that evaporates over time or water. Mm-hmm. And then that line will disappear, and then I begin a different motion. And in the case of this quilt, Kiwanabe, I've used what I call my water movement. They're not straight lines, and they're not really crooked lines. They're just a little bit on the slant, and they don't go all the way across. They just sort of try to emulate the motion of water in a large body.
Natalie's going to show you those quilting techniques in just a few minutes, but we're going to start with the easiest way, and that's with working with this scene we call Chance of Flurries. And the background fabric that we chose, the ombre fabric, had a paintbrush stroke already printed on it. Now yours may be a stippled or a modeled area. This had the stroke, so I decided to follow that stitching when I did the free motion stitching along this area. Now the setup for your machine to do this is the same, whether Natalie's doing the stitching or I am doing the stitching. You're going to lower your feed docks, you're going to use a clear thread, monofilament thread, and then a needle that's fine, either a size 70 or 80 Metafill or a size 70 to 75 universal needle. The choice is yours. My machine is set up with a free motion foot, an embroidery foot, or I should say quilting foot. The feed dogs have been dropped. So check your owner's manual for the setup. I'm just going to work with this sample that it's not a quilt, it's just working with the ombre fabrics, following the design in the fabric, the paintbrush stroke, and when I lower the foot, it's ready to do the stitching. And you may want to practice at first on something that is a sample just like this. And I'm just following the paintbrush strokes, simple as that. And that's how I did that entire quilt, following what I saw in front of me. But now for the real artistry of stippling, Natalie will do the sky and water differentiation.
I don't know about real artistry, but these little squibbles that I call stippling are they're like little drops of water. And round we go like this. When I get to the actual water, which I've drawn a line to indicate where I'm going to start water, I'm going to just make almost straight lines, but not really. Quite close together. As I get closer to the shoreline, the lines will get further apart to create the illusion of depth in the scene.
In nature, things are never perfectly straight, or they're just very free form.
Right.
Perfect place to learn stippling.
Exactly. You might want to use a stiletto to hold your pieces down as you sew.
The fabric gradates, and Natalie's stitching also changes as she gets to the darker portion near the shoreline. So we're using the same type of stitching, following the print of the fabric.
Right.
So now you've learned some of the very basics of designing with an ombre fabric, of stippling, putting all the layers of the ombre fabric together, and next we're going to use this same type of fabric as border options as we audition the light to dark fabric on the borders. The versatility of ombre fabrics, or fabrics that gradate, become even more evident when we use that fabric for borders. And this is very well executed in Natalie's quilt called Gray Day in August.
In Gray Day in August, I wanted to create the sense of light rising. I used very light leaves against a hand-dyed dark gray piece of fabric. And the leaves extend into the border, especially on the top, to create the sense of light on a very, very cloudy day.
And here's the fabric that Natalie used. Now granted, we're not going through step-by-step of landscape quilting, but we're showing you the versatility of the ombre fabrics, and you may want to use this in traditional quilting too, an ombre border. But one of the reasons that you added leaves into the borders to cover up these leaves.
That's right. This is exactly the color I wanted for the quilt, but it did have these very large leaves. So what a good excuse to use to violate the border by sticking leaves all over the quilt. It also helped to hide the fact that the very top of the quilt, which was cut from this very light piece, was really almost too flat, too plain to stand by itself. So in this case, the combination of an ombre coupled with leaves that just seemed to splay everywhere worked well.
It certainly did. And you'll see that with these quilts, Natalie cut the top and the lower borders from the lengthwise grain and the traditional crosswise cut for the side borders. And we can show our viewers that in your quilt, Autumn.
Here I did the same thing. Again, I used a hand-dyed background fabric. And this time this is a different time of year, it's fall, not quite so radiant, and I've used a darker ombre on the borders. I cut a piece of fabric from the top of the ombre that is lighter, and then side strips down to the bottom here. And then the bottom was cut across the fabric, and it's darker. And the effect is, if you look at the binding, for example, you almost think that the binding is an ombre itself, because up here it's so much darker than it is down here. So the effect is of magical light that an ombre offers.
So dark, going up to light, because we can use the gradated fabric. And wonderful presentation, and it's really subtle. Maybe someone wouldn't even know exactly that they're seeing this, but it helps set the mood.
Right.
Now, not all fabrics, or all designs, I should say, quilting, whether they're art quilts or they are traditional quilts, require having an ombre. Of course, that's a choice.
This is a quilt that Nancy and I designed together, one of the first quilts we did together. And I don't think we would have picked this subject if we hadn't had an ombre.
Sure.
because the lawn is such a crucial part of this scene. And having an ombre is the illusion of a lawn extending into the distance. You know, as you move from the foreground to the distance, you really need to make the hue disappear. An ombre does that.
Natalie, great examples. Thank you for sharing that with us, and I will know that you'll appreciate working with ombres and your art quilts. Most of us who are quilters always use fabric to create our designs, but not in Nancy's Corner today. We're going to meet Kathy Wilson, who has created quilts on barns. Here's a picture of one of her creations where you can see an 8-foot by 8-foot quilt block on a beautiful barn. Now please meet Kathy, our guest today. Kathy, you had the idea of having quilts on barns in your county.
I did.
And you now have 15 quilts in the Racine County in Wisconsin.
We do.
You started this idea thinking about it and etching out or sketching out designs. This is one of them.
That's one of them. They start out 8 by 8 inches, and it's just a plain grid, and then we color in the grid, and from there we transfer that information onto 2 4 by 8 pieces of plywood.
Now, this is an amazing transformation from small little 8 inches to 8 feet.
It is, and it's not as simple as you might think it is.
Here's a picture of one of your co-workers gridding this on a 4 by 8 piece of plywood, and then you double that.
Yes.
And then start painting. And after it's painted, the next step.
After it's painted, then it's we create a 2 by 4 piece of framework, and then that framework goes on the barns, and then the 2 pieces of plywood then are mounted on that and creates the 8-foot by 8-foot pattern.
This is it's a beautiful. The Mariner's Compass is the first quilt that we saw, and that or quilt block, I should say. It's striking.
It is, and it's right on a barn on Lake Michigan. So the Mariner's Compass was really important. The lighthouse is in Racine County, so everybody comes to the lighthouse and sees this beautiful barn with the Mariner's Compass on it.
You can go to sewingwithnancy.com, and under Nancy's Corner you can get the links, or you can take the tour, or there are 33 other states that have quilts on barns.
There are, that's what I've heard.
So it's amazing that the barn is a perfect palette for this large, beautiful quilt block.
It is. You know, there are lots of empty sides to barns, and there are red barns and gray barns and yellow barns, and we tried to match up different color combinations to the beauty of that particular barn.
Well, speaking of different colors of barns, let's share with our viewers some of the other scenes that you have, and we're going to show them 5 different ones.
Yeah, we have the Indian Trail pattern, which is a blue and black pattern.
Very striking.
And we found out that that's probably on an old Indian trail.
Coincidental.
Yes. And then there's the bear's paw pattern.
And this is one large block, and I like the color combinations.
And the owner of that farm actually took the paint and she painted the molding around her windows. She has flowers of the same color, and you know, she really made a scene of the whole thing.
Very nice.
And then we have a churn dash pattern, which is done in sort of modern colors.
Yes.
Purple and yellows and that colors. And then we have a log cabin, which is on a wonderful, wonderful barn, which has a donkey on the property called Amigo. And then we have the tulip basket pattern, and that is on a wonderful barn in the town of Norway, and it's a wonderful, wonderful barn.
Having that quilt block on point on this barn really fills the spans of that front of the barn.
It does, and it was something to fix that barn. We had to go inside the barn. You know, you think that you can just take these patterns and just hang them on the barn. Didn't happen that way. Some of the barns had to be shored up, and we did an audit of every barn to figure out how are we going to hang these panels.
You know, some of us work with quilts and it takes us 6 months, 8 months, a year, but your quilt project also took you a year in length.
It did. We didn't know exactly what we were doing when we started, and so we got a whole bunch of barn owners that wanted a pattern on their barn right away. And so we worked starting last February, and we just kept working, and by October we had 15 panels on the barns, and we had 200 people involved. We had quilt guilds painting, and cops and kids, and Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, all kinds of people were. This whole thing was a community project, and that's what I wanted from the very beginning.
And it's a great way of advertising the rural community that you live in and taking tours and enjoying the scenery plus unique quilt patterns. So this is a great way of preserving quilt designs, carrying on legacy of quilts, and thank you for creating this and doing this in your county.
Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, remember that there are 33 states that have quilts on barns, and you can just simply find in your area where you might take a tour and visit the beauty of quilting in wood, this time and not on fabric. Well, next time on Sewing with Nancy, we'll finish our program on versatile ombre quilting, and I'll show you another way of working the ombres, this time supersized blocks. Bye for now.
Nancy has written a fully illustrated book entitled Versatile Ombre Quilting, which includes all the information from this 3-part series. It's $14.99 plus shipping and handling. To order the book, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithnancy.com/2307. Order item number BK2307, Versatile Ombre Quilting. Credit card orders only. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at sewingwithnancy.com for more information on this program. Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Cabinets, Clover, Amazing Designs, and Class A Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Rowenta. Sewing with Nancy